Human Marcus Vela, ex-infantry veteran, now living off-grid in the Blue Ridge foothills of North Carolina, 8 years after the Keshari first contact and the brief, contained conflict that followed. Quiet man, keeps goats, grows things, doesn't answer the phone much. Alien child, a small girl, no older than 5 or 6 by human reckoning, pale silver lavender skin, 4 small secondary fingers on each hand, large amber eyes with a thin luminous ring around the iris, and a single faint bioluminescent stripe running from her left temple to her jaw. She cannot speak English. She is wearing a robe so fine it barely survived whatever brought her here. Setting, rural Earth, post-first contact era. The Keshari Protectorate has a formal embassy in Washington. Relations are careful, cold, and correct. Most humans have never seen one up close. Obstacle, federal agents and a Keshari retrieval team both want her. Marcus refuses to hand her to anyone until he knows she'll be safe. What he doesn't know, what nobody on Earth knows, is that this child is the first daughter of the Keshari sovereign line. Her disappearance has already moved fleets. Mood, protective heroic right arrow, quiet domestic warmth right arrow, full royal reveal right arrow doubters silenced. Ending, her people arrive, the retrieval team kneels. Marcus is named her Earth Guardian by Keshari law, not as a servant, as a peer. She calls him by the word that means the one who stayed. I found her on a Tuesday. That's the part nobody believes, the sheer ordinariness of it. Not during some dramatic first contact ceremony. Not at an embassy reception or a government briefing room with flags and translators and men in suits adjusting their ties for the cameras. On a Tuesday, in the rain, in the back field behind my goat pen, half hidden under the old stone wall where I stacked the extra fencing. I'd gone out because one of the Nubians, Persephone, the one with the lopsided ear, had gotten out again, and I could hear her somewhere past the tree line, making her opinion of the situation known to the general wilderness. I had a flashlight and a rain jacket, and about 0 patience for the evening I was having. I was not looking for an alien child. Nobody goes out looking for an alien child. But there she was. She was sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, back against the stone wall, in the kind of deliberate stillness that isn't a child being calm. It's a child who has learned that being noticed can be dangerous. She was watching me with those eyes. Large, amber gold. That thin ring of soft light around the iris, the way a lantern looks through horn. Her skin was the color of a winter sky 10 minutes before dawn, pale silver lavender, a tone that didn't exist in the human range. And down the left side of her face, from temple to jaw, there was a stripe. Thin as a finger's width, softly luminous, the color of a lightning bug seen through fog. She was, by any measure I had, the most alien thing I'd ever seen in person. And she was soaking wet, shaking, and trying very hard not to let me know she was scared. I'd been in the infantry. 2 tours in the years before first contact, 2 more in the 18-month period that the government officially calls the Keshari engagement, and that everyone who was actually in it calls something considerably less polite. I had seen things that rewire the part of your brain that decides how afraid to be of unusual situations. I had also, in that time, seen children displaced by things they didn't start and couldn't stop, children sitting in rubble or at roadsides in the rain, doing that same particular stillness. The one that means I will not cry because I have already learned that crying doesn't help. I turned off the flashlight. I crouched down slow, the way you do with a spooked animal or a frightened kid, making myself smaller than I was. I set the flashlight on the ground between us so the glow was indirect, enough to see by, not enough to blind. And then I just stayed there in the rain and let her look at me for as long as she needed. She looked for a long time. After a while she said something, soft, 3 syllables, a rising inflection at the end. I didn't know Keshari, almost no one did at that point outside the embassy staff and a handful of linguists. But the tone was unmistakable. She was asking a question. "Marcus," I said and touched my chest. Then I pointed at her, the way you point at someone when you want to know their name. She watched my finger, she looked at my face. She seemed to be running some kind of internal calculation, the kind that children run when they're deciding whether an adult is one of the safe ones. Whatever she concluded, it made her uncurl slightly, just her shoulders coming down an inch, just the smallest reduction in the space she was taking up, which is the opposite of what a frightened child does. It meant she decided she could afford to take up a little more. She said something else, 2 syllables, clean and precise, with a consonant at the front that I didn't have a category for. I did my best to repeat it. She tilted her head at what I produced. She did it again, slightly slower. I tried again. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, more the involuntary reaction to someone making an extremely earnest attempt at something they're clearly terrible at. Close enough, I said, even though she didn't understand me. Come on, let's get you inside before we both drown. I won't pretend I knew what I was doing. The rational thing, the thing every government pamphlet and post-contact protocol document would have told me to do, was to call the Keshari embassy hotline and report an unaccompanied alien minor. They had a number. It was on a card I had somewhere in a kitchen drawer, issued to all rural residents in the post-contact era, along with guidance about what to do if you encountered a Keshari national in distress. I found the card. I read it while she sat at my kitchen table wrapped in an old flannel blanket, eating crackers, which, after a careful sniff and a suspicious look at me eating one first, she had decided were acceptable, and watching me with those amber eyes. The card said, "Do not approach, maintain a safe distance, contact the number below immediately and await the arrival of authorized personnel." I looked at the card, I looked at her. There were 4 secondary fingers on each of her hands, small, finer boned than the main 4, positioned where a human's thumb pad would be. And she was using 2 of them to hold the cracker. And she was doing it with the methodical concentration of a child who has been taught to do things carefully, and is applying that lesson to crackers as seriously as she would apply it to anything else. I put the card back in the drawer. I told myself I'd call in the morning. I told myself it was too late in the evening, the rain was getting worse, and whatever response team they sent would take hours anyway. These were not entirely dishonest reasons. They were also not the real reason. The real reason was simpler. She was a child, she was frightened, she was cold, and she was here. And I have never in my life been able to hand a frightened child to a stranger and walk away feeling like I'd done the right thing. I found her a dry shirt, one of mine, which came down to her ankles and made her look briefly appalled, and then unexpectedly made her make that almost smile again. I got the wood stove going in the main room. I pulled out the cot from the back bedroom that I kept for when my sister's kids visited, and I made it up with the spare quilt, and I showed her where it was and where the bathroom was, and tried to mime the general idea of this is a safe place and you can sleep here. She watched all of this with that careful attention. When I finished, she looked at me, looked at the cot, looked at me again. Then she said something long and formal sounding, with a cadence that reminded me of nothing so much as someone reciting from memory, something rehearsed or ceremonial. I had no idea what she was saying. "You're welcome," I said anyway. She tilted her head again. Then she climbed onto the cot, pulled the quilt around herself with those precise secondary fingers, and closed her eyes. I sat in the kitchen for a while, listening to the rain, trying to figure out what exactly I'd got myself into. By morning, she was awake before me. I found her in the kitchen, standing on her toes to look out the window above the sink at the goat pen. Persephone, whom I'd eventually located and retrieved the night before, complaining loudly the whole way, was staring back at her from across the fence with the unsettling forward confidence that Nubians bring to all social situations. The child was holding perfectly still, watching the goat. The goat was watching the child. It was unclear who was more interested. "That's Persephone," I said. She startled just slightly, caught off guard, the first time I'd seen her move without deliberateness. Then she straightened up and looked at me with an expression that said she had not, in fact, been startled at all, and I was mistaken to have thought so. I made coffee. I found a tin of the oat crackers she'd liked. I put them on the table and sat down, and for a while we just existed in the same kitchen in the early morning quiet, which is something I've always found to be a reasonable baseline for getting to know someone. She watched me drink coffee. After a while she pointed at the mug. "Coffee," I said. "You don't want it, trust me." She looked at me with the expression of someone who would like to make that determination themselves. I got a small mug and poured about an inch of coffee into it and pushed it across to her. She picked it up with both hands, main fingers and secondary fingers together, brought it to her nose and inhaled deeply. A pause, a longer pause. Then she set it back down very carefully and pushed it back toward me. I drank mine. She nodded, as if a hypothesis had been confirmed. That morning, sitting at my kitchen table with the rain easing off and the light coming gray-gold through the windows, we started to teach each other. I would point at something and say the word. She would repeat it with extraordinary precision. Her ear for phonemes was startling, better than mine by a significant margin. Then she would say the Keshari word and I would do my best, and she would listen to what I produced with patient, earnest attention and occasionally, when I was particularly far from the mark, make that almost smile. By mid-morning I knew, Verk was water, Sol was light. Nen was the word she used when Persephone appeared at the fence again, and from context, I decided it meant something like strange creature or possibly boldly rude animal. She'd pointed at the mug of coffee and said a word I was fairly sure translated to mistake. By the third time I pointed at the wood stove and said heat, and she repeated it back to me cleanly on the first try. I had made a decision. I wasn't calling anyone. Not yet. Not until I knew more about where she'd come from and what had happened to her and who she'd be handed to if I made that call. I had contacts from my service years. I still knew people who knew things. I was going to figure out what was going on before I put her into any system, government or otherwise. I am not a reckless man. I want to be clear about that. But I am a man who spent 4 years watching what happens when the people making decisions about a situation are too far from it to feel the weight of what they're deciding, and I have never fully recovered from that. She was right here. She was a child. She was eating crackers and teaching me Keshari words with the serious concentration of someone who understood that communication was important. She was real and particular and present, and that meant something that a hotline number could not account for. I called my sister instead. My sister Diane is 8 years older than me and has been finishing my sentences since I was in elementary school. She is a pediatric nurse, a person of significant practicality, and one of approximately 3 people on Earth I trust completely. "Tell me you're not harboring a Keshari child," she said, when I'd gotten halfway through explaining. "I haven't called anyone," I said. "Marcus." She was alone in the rain under the stone wall. She was soaking. She was scared. A long silence. "Send me a photo," Diane said. I took a careful photo. The child had looked at the phone with immediate interest, poked the screen experimentally, and then gone back to watching Persephone and sent it. Another silence. "She's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life," Diane said quietly. "Yeah. The stripe on her face is bioluminescent. Seems like. Marcus, those secondary fingers are. I know. She's not like any Keshari I've seen in photos. Her coloring is different. Most of the ones at the embassy have darker skin, deeper tones. This silver lavender is." "Different," I said. "Different," Diane agreed. A pause. "I'm not telling you to call the hotline." "Good." But Marcus, you have to figure out who she is and where she came from. If she's lost, she has people looking for her. If something happened to bring her here, if there was an accident, a ship, something, her family could be looking. She could be terrified about her family. I looked at the kid, who was now standing at the back door watching the rain drip off the porch roof with focused attention. I know, I said. Let me make some calls, Diane said. I know someone at State who handles the Keshari liaison office, not the public number, the actual office. Let me find out if anyone's reported a missing child. Quietly. Marcus, I am the definition of quietly. Diane called back 3 hours later. Nothing on any report, she said. No missing child filed with the embassy, no inquiry through the Keshari liaison office, nothing in the alert system. I talked to Jenna, the one at State, and she ran it quietly. Either this child's disappearance hasn't been reported yet, or it was reported through a channel we don't have access to, or nobody's looking, I said. Nobody we can see is looking, Diane corrected. That's different. I was looking at the child, who had, in the hours since my phone call, done the following. Learned the names of all 4 goats, learned to operate the water tap in the bathroom without assistance, discovered my bookshelf and removed every book that had pictures in it, and arranged them on the floor in a row with geometric precision. And when I had set about making lunch, positioned herself beside me at the counter, and watched every step of the process with the focused attention of someone committing a procedure to memory. She's not afraid, I said. Or she's not afraid the way a child is when they've been lost or abandoned. She's careful, she's watchful, but she's not panicking. What are you saying? I don't know yet, I said. I'm saying it doesn't feel like she ended up here by accident. Diane was quiet for a moment. Jenna said one other thing. She said there's been some unusual communication traffic from the Keshari diplomatic band in the last 24 hours. Encrypted, high priority. She doesn't know what it is, but she said whatever it is, it's got people at the embassy moving fast. I looked at the child, who had followed me to the phone call and was now watching me with those amber eyes, the luminous ring visible even in the daytime light. Okay, I said. Keep the line open. On the second day, she told me her name. We'd been going through words. She'd graduated from objects to actions, and she was teaching me with the systematic patience of someone who understood the project had to be built correctly from the ground up. When she paused, pointed at herself, and said it. Long 4 syllables with a sound at the center I couldn't reproduce. She waited while I tried. She said it again. I tried again. She considered what I'd produced. She said a shorter version, 2 syllables. She tapped her own chest. Sairin, I tried. Something shifted in her expression, not the almost smile this time. Something more serious. She said it once more, slowly. Saren, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded once, with a gravity that felt outsized for the gesture, like she was confirming something more significant than a name. Marcus, I said, tapping my chest. Marcus, she repeated. She got it exactly right the first time. She had been getting everything exactly right since the beginning. Then she said something else, a short phrase, just a few words, and even though I didn't know what it meant, the cadence of it was the same as what she'd said the night she arrived. The rehearsed, formal quality, like a title or a formula or the correct way to address something in a ceremony. I didn't know what she was saying. I nodded like I did. On the morning of the 3rd day, they came. I heard them before I saw them, a vehicle on the access road, moving faster than anyone with legitimate business on that road moves. 2 vehicles. I was outside with Saren when I heard them. She heard them before I did, her head turning sharply toward the sound with an alertness that had nothing childlike about it. I put my hand on her shoulder, light, not restraining, and she looked up at me, and I looked down at her, and something passed between us that I don't have a precise word for. Inside, I said. She went. She didn't argue, didn't hesitate, went through the back door into the kitchen as calmly as if I'd suggested it rather than said it, which, I was learning, was how she operated. Calm as a method, not as an absence of feeling. I went to the front. 2 black SUVs had pulled up in the drive. Out of the first, 2 men in the kind of suits that mean federal. Out of the second, 3 people in the gray-fitted uniforms of the Keshari embassy staff. I knew the uniform because I'd seen it on television. The Keshari were taller than humans on average, long-limbed, and these 3 had the darker silver-gray skin that characterized most of the diplomatic personnel I'd seen in photos. Their eyes were different from Saren's. Darker. The luminous ring, if they had one, wasn't visible from where I stood. I stayed on the porch. "Mr. Vila," the first federal man said, reaching for a badge. "I'm Special Agent Cole, Department of Homeland Security. We have reason to believe you have an unaccompanied Keshari minor on your property." "Do you have a warrant?" I said. He blinked. "Sir, this is a matter of federal and interplanetary." "Do you have a warrant?" He looked at the man next to him. Something exchanged between them, the kind of look that means we didn't think we'd need one. "We're not here to cause trouble," the second one said. He had the voice of someone who is used to that sentence working. "We're here for the child's welfare. If there's an alien minor on your property, then she's under my roof and she's warm and she's eating and she's fine," I said. "And I'd like to see the warrant." The Keshari in the embassy uniforms had been standing in a cluster near their vehicle. Now the one in the center, the tallest, with a posture that suggested rank, stepped forward. When she spoke, it was in English, precise and accented and clearly deliberate. "Mr. Vila," she said, "I am Senior Liaison Verath of the Keshari Embassy. We have received information suggesting a Keshari child came to rest on your property. We are not here as adversaries. We are here because the child may be in circumstances that require our involvement." "What circumstances?" I said. A pause. The senior liaison's eyes moved to the house, then back to me. "That information is classified within our diplomatic protocols," she said. "Then we're at an impasse," I said pleasantly, "because I'm not opening my door based on classified." Something happened in the cluster of Keshari behind Verath. A shift. A low exchange in their language that was too fast for me to follow, though I had learned perhaps 40 words in 3 days, and 40 words was not enough for that speed. Agent Cole's jaw tightened. "Mr. Vila, I want to impress on you that obstructing." "Marcus." Her voice came from behind me, through the screen door, clear and small and carrying. I turned. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, framed by the screen, looking past me at the cluster of people in the drive. Her chin was up. Her hands were at her sides. She was wearing the dry shirt of mine she'd adopted. It still came down past her knees, and the luminous stripe on her face was, I noticed for the first time, brighter than it had been yesterday. Sharper, like something had been switched on. She said something to the people in the drive. I didn't understand the words, but I heard what happened after. The 3 Keshari in embassy uniforms went still. Not the stillness of confusion, the stillness of recognition, the kind that moves through a body from the top down, like water finding its level. And then slowly, with the precision of a practiced gesture, Senior Liaison Verath went to one knee. The other 2 followed. Agent Cole said, "What?" "Be quiet," I said, not unkindly, just a fact. Saren said something else. She was looking at Verath. Her voice was small, but it had that formal quality, the cadence I'd heard twice now, the rehearsed, ceremonial one, and Verath, still kneeling, responded. Short, very careful. Then Saren looked at me. She said, "Marcus." She said the 2-syllable thing she'd said before, when she told me her name, the one that felt like a title. Then she said the word for stay. I'd learned that one on the first morning. Veen, stay, remain, be present. She'd used it when I went to check on the goats and she'd wanted to know if I was coming back. Veen, stay. Yeah, I said, I'm staying. It took most of the day to sort out. The federal agents made some phone calls. The phone calls led to more phone calls. At one point, I counted 3 different government agencies represented in my driveway, which is not something I had anticipated when I'd moved to this property for the explicit purpose of having fewer people around. Senior Liaison Vereth asked to come inside. I made coffee. Saren watched this happen from the kitchen table with the expression she'd been wearing since the moment in the doorway, which was composed and careful and older than her face. And I sat down at the table and Vereth sat across from me and we talked for 4 hours. This is what I learned. Saren's full name was Saren Velkorath. The Vel prefix indicated lineage, as it did throughout the Keshari naming system. The Korath line was not a diplomatic family or a military family or a scholarly family. The Korath line was the sovereign line, has been for 300 years by Keshari reckoning. Saren's mother was the sitting sovereign of the Keshari protectorate. Saren was the first daughter, the acknowledged heir, the child whose safety or loss could, and it had turned out did, move fleets. She had arrived on Earth alone because her transport had been intercepted. Not crashed, intercepted. There were people, within the Keshari political structure, who did not want the current sovereign to remain sovereign. There had been an attempt to use the first daughter as a piece in that conflict. The attempt had failed, in the sense that the people who made it had not foreseen that a 5-year-old who had been raised to understand that composure was the first obligation of rank would. When the transport's emergency systems deployed her individual survival pod, land in a back field in rural North Carolina, and proceed to wait quietly in the rain until something useful happened. She was not afraid, I said to Vereth. She was watchful, but she wasn't afraid. Vereth looked at the child, who was sitting at the far end of the table with her crackers, listening to a conversation she could only partially follow. No, Vereth said, she would not have been. She has been taught from very young that fear is not an action. She is the sovereign's daughter. She would not have permitted herself to panic. I thought about the way she'd looked at me from under the stone wall, the deliberate stillness, the calculation I'd seen in her eyes. How old is she? I said, in terms I can understand. The equivalent of your 5.5 years, Vereth said, perhaps 6. 5.5 years old, alone in a field in the rain on a foreign planet, and she had decided to wait and see. The situation with the interceptors, I said, is she safe now? The primary actors have been detained, Vereth said. The fleet response was immediate once her pod's location was identified. The danger that brought her here is contained. She will be returned to her mother when the sovereign's vessel arrives. When's that? 3 days. I nodded. She stays here until then. Vereth looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Mr. Vila. She knows where the bathroom is, I said. She knows the goats by name. She's been here 3 days and she's eating and she's calm and she's not scared. You're not moving her to some government facility or embassy holding room with 3 days left. She stays here. A silence. Vereth looked at Saren again. Saren, who had been watching this exchange, looked back at Vereth. She said something short. Vereth's composure shifted just slightly, not breaking, adjusting, like a frame settling. She says, Vereth said carefully, that you make acceptable crackers and that your goats are nin. I looked at Saren, she looked at me. Bold and rude, I said. That's what nin means, right? I looked it up. She did the almost smile. The real one, full enough now that it was beginning to be just a smile. It is an affectionate term, Vereth said, when used in this context. Good, I said. The goats are fond of her too. 3 days. Looking back, I understand they were important days. Not because anything dramatic happened, they were ordinary days. the kind I usually spent alone. Morning chores, afternoon work in the small workshop behind the house, evenings with a book or the radio. What changed was that none of it was alone. Saren came to the morning chores with me on the first of the 3 days and established, by sitting on the fence rail and watching with focused attention, that this was her position for goat observation. Persephone, being Persephone, immediately tried to investigate the occupant of the fence rail. Saren regarded this with the patience of someone who has decided that boldly rude animals are allowed to be themselves. She learned 12 more English words those 3 days, not the simple ones. She'd moved on from those. She wanted complicated and understand and enough and why. She was particularly interested in why. She asked it in Keshari approximately 40 times a day, and I tried to answer in whatever combination of English, Keshari, and physical demonstration I could manage. And she would listen and nod, and sometimes make the expression that meant she found my reasoning interesting, and sometimes make the expression that meant she found my reasoning wrong and was being polite about it. On the evening of the second day, I was reading and she came and sat next to me on the couch, just sat, the way children do, taking up space without announcement, and looked at what I was reading. It was a book of maps. Old ones, historical. She looked at the pages for a while, her secondary fingers turning the pages with that habitual care. She pointed at the blue, the ocean on the spread of the Atlantic. Water, she said. Her English was getting cleaner every time she used it. A lot of water, I agreed. She said something in Keshari, a question from the inflection. I don't know that word, I said. She said it again, then touched the page, then touched her chest, then pointed at the window where the dark was. A gesture that swept out beyond the field, beyond the mountains, beyond. Home, I tried. She considered that. Then she nodded and said the Keshari word, and I repeated it, and she looked at me and said, yes. Just that, a new word deployed perfectly in the right moment. Yes. You're going home soon, I said. She looked at the map for a little longer. Then she said, slowly, carefully, in English she'd been accumulating and fitting together like someone building something precise. I know. And then, without looking at me, but here also good. I didn't answer that for a moment. Yeah, I said, here is also good. The Sovereign's vessel did not do the thing I'd expected, which was to approach through official channels and come in clean and visible with a diplomatic escort. It apparently did the thing that a sovereign whose child had been taken does, which is to arrive with sufficient force to make the political statement, and then worry about the diplomatic niceties afterward. I heard it before I saw it, a sound like the air deciding to do something different, a pressure change that made the windows flex in their frames. And then I went outside, and there were 3 Keshari vessels visible in the early morning sky, holding position over the ridge, and the 4th one coming down. It came down in the back field. Not crashing, landing, precisely and deliberately in the field behind the goat pen, in the only space large enough to hold it, which it fit into with a margin of perhaps 15 feet on each side. The goats expressed their opinions loudly from the other side of the fence. Persephone, I noticed, was facing the ship without retreating, bold and rude to the last. I stood on the back porch with Saren beside me. She was wearing the clothes that Vareth had brought from the embassy 2 days ago, proper Keshari clothing, not my oversized flannel shirt, though she kept the flannel and folded it carefully and set it on the cot as if it was something to be kept. The clothes were finer than anything I'd seen. The robe she'd arrived in had been ruined by the rain. This was what it was meant to look like. Deep silver fabric that moved like water, with fine geometric embroidery at the hem and sleeves in a darker thread. She looked suddenly and completely like what she was. She was still herself, though, same composed face, same amber eyes with that ring of light, same careful, deliberate quality to every movement. The ship opened. People came down, Keshari in the gray embassy uniform and Keshari in something different, darker, with an insignia I didn't know. And then one more, not in uniform at all, in something that was closer to what Saren was wearing but more of it, layered, with the same geometric embroidery at the collar. Tall, silver skin with a warmth to it deeper than Saren's lavender silver. The same amber eyes, the same luminous stripe, temple to jaw, but on the other side. She came down the ramp, and she crossed the field, and she did not stop until she was crouched on the wet grass with her arms around her daughter. And whatever she said quietly, and it was not for me. I looked at the ridge. I looked at the goats. I gave them as much time as I could reasonably create. When I looked back, the sovereign was standing. Saren was beside her, one of those small fine hands holding her mother's. The sovereign was looking at me. She said something to Verath, who had appeared at her left shoulder. Verath said, "She thanks you." "She doesn't need to," I said. Verath spoke to the sovereign. The sovereign looked at me and said something else longer. Verath listened, then turned to me. She says, her daughter was alone on a world not her own, among people not her kind, and the first person to find her chose to protect her rather than to report her. She says she does not have a word for what you are in Keshari law, but she intends to create one. I didn't know what to say to that. I don't think I said anything. Saren tugged her mother's hand. She said something, and I caught one word, my name, 2 syllables, the way she said it. The sovereign looked at her daughter and then back at me with an expression that I've since come to understand was not the diplomatic mask that the Keshari usually showed Earth. It was something personal. She spoke again. Verath said, "She asks if you would accept the title of Earth Guardian to the first daughter under Keshari Compact. It is a formal designation. It means..." Verath paused, searching for the precise translation. "It means the one who holds the line, when all other lines are uncertain, the one who can be trusted to stay." I looked at Saren. She was looking at me. That straight, direct look, amber eyes with the light around them, chin just slightly up the way she held it when she wanted to be sure I understood something important. She said the word she'd said on the porch when the embassy cars came. "Veen, stay." "Tell her yes," I said. There's a moment in the official record, the Keshari embassy documentation, which was eventually declassified to the extent that anything from that period is declassified, where the designation is logged. Earth Guardian to the first daughter of the sovereign line of the Keshari Protectorate. 1 Marcus Vila, rural North Carolina. Recorded as accepted under Compact. Under occupation, the original Keshari notation uses a word that translates roughly as the one who remained. Saren visits twice a year. She has, at my last count, taught me approximately 300 Keshari words, which she says is not enough but which she acknowledges is a reasonable beginning. She has named Persephone in Keshari, which translates roughly to the audacious one, and Persephone seems to understand that she has been recognized. On her last visit, she arrived in proper diplomatic fashion, with a small escort and the correct forms filed with the correct offices, and all the particular ceremony that comes with being who she is. She came down the ramp with the composure of someone who has spent years practicing it. And then she crossed the field and walked up the back steps to the porch where I was waiting, and she used the word for hello that I'd taught her, plain English, no ceremony required, and I said it back. And we went inside, and she sat at the kitchen table and ate crackers, and told me about everything that had happened since I'd seen her last. She's getting tall. The stripe on her face is more vivid than it was when she was 5. Her English is now far better than my Keshari, which she says is still embarrassing, and which I maintain shows character. On the cot in the back bedroom, folded at the foot of it, there's an old flannel shirt. She leaves it there when she goes. She says it means she's coming back. And